Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. We've been on a 2-week hiatus, so you haven't seen a video from us for a couple of weeks. One of the reasons is because we thought we would try a new format. So instead of today me just rambling on about some topic, I have actually a guest, Daniel Brownwood. We talked a little bit about startups, AI, generative AI, being middle, left, right polarization in the US, and some other stuff as well. So check it out. Here we go. All right, rolling on our side. So slam poetry.
Yeah, so I just felt like in the US it was more like constrained and formulaic. There's kind of like just sort of expected topics in a way. And in Hungary, no one knew what it was, so it was just like crazy. Like you go up there and literally do anything.
What was the expected topics though? Like, is it like political or what's the?
Yeah, I felt like there was definitely, well, for a while, I don't know what it's like now, but it was like basically a kind of it was in vogue to like come out at slam poetries. So there was a lot of that stuff, which was, yeah, I think the first,
like it was a fad.
Yeah, where it was like, oh, someone I guess started it, and a lot of people thought this was a cool venue or format to tell the world, and they felt, I guess, safer if their, I don't know, family was there, whatever. So the things, it's like most things, like the first time you do it, it's interesting. Second time you do it, it's like a throwback to the first time, and then so on. But after a while, it's just like, okay, you guys aren't really, adding anything new. No one's really like thinking about new things. It's just kind of formulaic, right? So I wasn't really inspired. Ultimately, I did perform a bit, but just kind of lost my inspiration. And I definitely put a lot more of my creative energy into like startups and like day job stuff. So it just kind of waned.
That's a very good point. So let me give you my opinion on this. I've only been in this startup for like 2 years in the management, right? So I'm a co-founder 4 years now, but I was actually jumped into the management about 1.5 to 2 years ago. For the first 2 years, I was just like board member, so strategic level stuff. But now that I'm in it, I mean, is it creative? Is it supposed to be creative, or is it capitalistic? Are you supposed to like? I'm kind of stuck because I feel like a startup should be more like about solving a problem, but at the same time, you're spending so much time like fundraising and looking for investors and stuff like that it just becomes very capitalistic at some point. And I mean, my background, is business consulting, so I have a more of a capitalistic view of the world in general. And I don't know. I feel like there's investors that don't want to hear that shit. They just want to talk about like you want to be passionate about whatever, but at the same time, they want to make 10x their money. And then when I talk about 10xing their money, they kind of, so is it really supposed to be a creative process, or is it just more like, fuck it, let's just make more money? I don't know. I'm kind of stuck. What's your take?
Well, I'm lucky because I get to, so I went, I started much more in business consulting with you, and then sales and marketing. So mostly like customer facing things. And I've actually gone the opposite direction. A lot of people, I've become more technical. So now I'm like a VP of product. And for me, this is a very fun role because it basically intersects all the things that, I've done in the past. But I get to be creative every day. So we're, looking for one hand, it's like your customers, behavior, desires, needs. That's always going to be a huge input. But then the other one is kind of like business pragmatism. It's like what features will have, let's say, the biggest ARR impact? Like essentially, what's the ROI on each line of code? That's kind of how you think about it, but it's not from the, I would say, kind of like vapid, like financial point of view. It's really from the, what will people pay for? What do they want? What will excite them point of view? So you get to like, okay, so if we build this feature, like how well will we be able to monetize it compared to this other feature? And then you're constantly like weighing those probabilities. So it's creative, but it also intersects business on like the higher level, I think that's really the CEO's job. Like he or she, or they should be the ones kind of protecting the company from this type of thinking where they need to be focused on 10x per se. They should be more focused on their subset of tasks that speak to it. And a lot of that should be just creative and compassionate. So compassionate to your customers, like what are they going through? What are you helping them with? And really that should be your kind of waking emotion, in my opinion. And then everyone else should just be kind of like, yeah, supporting that. Like you guys are here to come together to make someone's life maybe 5 to 10 times easier based on the efficiency you provide. And that should really be everyone's focus. You shouldn't be worried about the balance sheet, I think, when you go in. That should be like the CEO, CFO's job, and you should protect others from that, in my opinion.
Sure. I mean, I get that. I'm on board with that because when you're talking about a microcosm of one startup and the different functions within the startup, then you're totally right. The functions should be totally focused on customer success. If it's product or even marketing and sales, or customer support or development, it doesn't matter. You should be focused on customer success. Agreed. My point was more about the industry, not just the
I see.
in one individual element. Because, like, what happened? I mean, about 5 years ago, 10 years ago, if you had a million ARR, you were worth, 80, 90 million was the fucking valuation, which was crazy. It's not real. And everybody knew it wasn't real, but there was this kind of bubble effect, right? And there was some speculation involved, etc. So, but then pandemic, that's one shock, and then war, that's second shock, and then inflation, third shock, and supply chain issues, fourth shock. So these are like shocks to the system, global shocks, just not in this industry specifically. But because of these shocks, these valuations have plummeted. Like plummeted, i.e. came back to a reality where it was supposed to be, right? So my point is, when you have that kind of, lag, because what happened is, like, these startups, I have a couple of really good friends that have like 100 million, 200 million valuation startups. And what happened is, during like the pandemic, during these shocks, they actually grew because, work from home, and they were in that sort of AI space. They did a round at 150 valuation. Now they're screwed because their runway went from like 3 years to 2 years, so they're shortened. But at the same time, they just didn't have enough time to grow their valuation to a point where they can do another round, and they're kind of stuck in like limbo. Basically, it's not they don't want to do a down round. They can't do another up round. Bridge finance, they're looking for so basically go back to the pot and ask for more money. Like, please, investor, give me more, just to save the old money that you already gave me. So they're kind of in this limbo space. And when you're in that limbo space, you have no choice as an industry to focus on capital.
Yeah.
Instead of focusing on customer success. It's very difficult to focus on customer success when you know that, 3 months from now, you're not making payroll. So, and you're 100 million, 150 million valuation company. So it's not like you're 1 million valuation or 5 million in like pre-seed or seed, where you could get a bridge round and kind of with 500,000 loan, you're alive for another 5 months. We're talking about like giant burn rates, right? So when you take that into perspective, a lot of the companies now are, at least the ones that I'm talking to, they're talking much less about like customer success and problems and users and how they use the product. And they're talking a lot more on basically, we need money now or we're going under, and this is a problem. So, I mean, from that perspective, it's super complicated because it's not like the 2008 crisis. The 2008 crisis was very different because in 2008, there was no money. People ran, they just ran out of money.
Crisis.
Right now, there's a shit ton of money in the VCs. The VCs are extremely liquid. They also have a deadline on when they need to, disperse those funds, or they lose the funds. So they have to actually put money into the system. But at the same time, their risk has gone from here to here. So their valuation went from, 1 million was 100, 1 million AR was 100 valuation. Now like 1 million is 10, 12, 15 valuation. So it came back down to reality. So they're kind of stuck in this, but the cash is there. So I feel like, at least from my perspective, here's my theory on this. If you're a startup right now, your anything you should be focused on is resilience. You need to survive for the next 2 years. If you do, then you're going to be like flowing in cash, because once those VCs hit those deadlines where they have to actually distribute these funds, then all of that's going to come, flowing down, and all of these VCs who are still alive, all the startups that are still alive, are going to just skyrocket, basically. And
yeah,
at least that's what my theory is.
No, I'm on board, like, probably with most everything you just said. It makes sense to look back at, like, how did we get here, in a way, like basically the VC market, not just the VC market, all the markets were just so overheated. It kind of peaked post COVID, and so you had, well, what's happened is there's been, interestingly, even though record amounts of capital deployed year over year, there was a decrease in the number of VC firms. So they've actually consolidated. So just like a bunch of big firms like SoftBank and Tiger and whatever, Sequoia, putting together these giant super funds, right? And then they had the same schedules as smaller funds to deploy these funds. So they could not go through diligence, basically, in order to deploy that fund in that 5-year period or whatever. Like, if you're talking about deploying like $150 billion in like 5 years, what are you doing? You're writing ridiculous check sizes. You're cutting corners. You're just trying to, spread your chips as far and wide as possible, as quickly as possible, because everything's green. So it's like, whatever, something's going to hit, and we'll do well. Now that's just like bull market fallacy stuff, right? Like, in bull markets, everyone's a genius. In bear markets, everyone's an idiot. I don't know. So it's interesting to see, what caused it, because that speaks to the whole like mission versus economics thing. By the time this market was, white hot and peaking, they were throwing money at anything, like literally anything. Like, I saw just absurd startups that had no product, really could not explain their product market fit or demonstrate it. They didn't really have a differentiated offering, and they were still like, oh, we just closed 10 million, like whatever, late seed, pre-series A, series A, whatever. And you heard a lot of this a couple of years ago. And so they were, in a way, they were like, well, everyone's going to make money anyway, so what else are you doing? Like, what is your differentiation besides giving me 10x my money? It's speaking to some sort of higher level, mission for mankind. And in a way, and I know this is something we're probably going to touch on later, but in a way, Elon Musk is kind of the poster child of this to me. He is extremely good at dressing up.
I was waiting when you were going to say Elon Musk. I think we're starting the Musk bashing a little bit early, aren't we? No, I'm kidding. Go ahead.
Problem is, it's like I have to kind of mention it, because for me, he sort of gamed and mastered this this flow, right? He sees an opportunity. He invests in it. He brings it to market, and then he secures the biggest investors and sells a huge mission on top of what it was product. The mission, like the mission of his companies compared to what they're doing, can often be quite distant. And he doesn't necessarily ever need to
colonize Mars. Colonize Mars.
He never needs to actually colonize Mars. He just needs to make it cheaper to deliver satellites to space and bring other people to space. Right? He just needs to reduce cost for space travel. Whether you go to Saturn or Mars eventually, it's like, that's kind of beside the point. It's probably never really going to be that profitable to go to Mars, or it might be just like at time scales we can't understand right now. So it's like, he just sells something crazy. And why do we need to go to Mars? Because humankind is at risk of extinction, and the only way to stave that off is to make us multiplanetary. Like, it's so much, right? If you're sitting in a VC pitch meeting and someone tells that to you, you're like, what?
If I go in like tomorrow,
1,000-year timeline I'm investing in, like, when am I getting my returns on this seed round, dude?
If I go in tomorrow and tell my current investor that my new mission is to put boots on Mars, he will pull out his investment so fast. I'll wake up broke. My company will be done like in 24 hours. It's ridiculous. Here's what I really don't like about Elon. Like, here's my real position. I think his brands and who he is really are extremely far away from each other. And this is what bothers me. Like Warren Buffett. Warren Buffett is a pure capitalist and he accepts it. He's open about it. He tells as it is, and he is who he is. Warren Buffett, the brand, and Warren Buffett, the human being, are probably the same exact person. Elon Musk isn't that way. So what I don't like about Elon Musk is he positions himself as this like sweetheart darling for the engineers and engineering guys. And smart intellectual, you know, like this genius sort of avenue. Whereas he's not. He's just a very, very good investor and CEO. He's a good manager. He's a good CEO, no doubt. He's a great investor, of course. But first of all, he didn't come from nothing, so it's not like it's a startup where he came from absolutely nothing. He has some family money. There was capital there. And then, all this engineering stuff, engineering talk that goes about, he's not the real. I mean, what has he actually created?
Right. I don't know what he's actually coded himself.
It's not the coding part, it's the founding part. What did he found?
Oh, that I don't know either, because he seems to pick up things that exist and then scale them out.
Exactly. So he's a great investor and he's a great manager. Well, so is Warren Buffett.
Right.
But their brands are completely dichotic, and this is where I don't accept it. This is where I don't like about it, because I feel like there's a element of authenticity missing from him, and I feel like the CEOs of today, they're much more authentic. Even Tim Cook, we can call him. I mean, he's probably a pure capitalist because he's running one of the largest companies in the world in terms of market cap, but he is who he is, and that's how he comes across. And that's sort of what the new CEO trend has been like overall with this tech industry coming in. This level of authenticity has come into play where you can't just kind of fake it till you make it, big corporate CEO stuff. But I feel like Elon is kind of breaking away. He found like the cheat code. He's authentic, but he's not authentic at the same time. So he's not authentic enough that he can actually, manipulate stocks and make sure his stock price is going up and keep fundraising, etc. But at the same time, he's like super not authentic because it's just not who he really is. And I think that's where I create that dichotomy. And I don't like people like that. I feel like they're manipulative.
Well, he is. I mean, listen, his online persona to me is the equivalent of like Jake Paul. So basically,
oh my God, that's hilarious. So I've never heard this one.
He's not a professional boxer, athlete, whatever.
Sure.
But he goes around calling all of them out, and just stirring up, just basically trying to get as many people to hate him as possible. This is actually currency, turns out, on the internet, and then by strange or deference, the stock market can respond to this too. So he's kind of figuring out, and that's why Twitter is so important to him, in my opinion, is that he basically manipulates his stocks through his persona. And he did this with Bitcoin. He did this a lot with crypto, for example.
Sure.
He was the architect of so many pump and dumps. I don't know if you could sell this as a service to other whales. Be like, I have a Twitter profile that can move price. Do you guys want to do a pump and dump? But I was honestly, because it's unregulated, it's plausible. That he
doesn't even have to collude. I mean, like the straight up collusion of calling people and like having an agreement. He doesn't even need to do that. He has whales around him anyway. And if he just tweets basically Dogecoin, all of the whales will follow suit. So he doesn't have to actually call. They already know it. Right. He owns Twitter. He has a massive following, a massive audience. So they know that if he clicks the button, everybody's going to click the button. So they kind of follow suit. Right. It's sort of like what George Soros did with the pound in the 1970s. What was it? Black Thursday, Black Friday or something? What's it called? Sure. Basically, the pound went down to 30-40% just because he said it would go down. Obviously, it did. And obviously, he was the one betting against it. But it's just a matter of influence. The only difference here is that he owns the media. And I think that's, again, where the manipulation is.
I know, I fully agree. That's problematic. And I really think, at this point, he's danced so much with the devil and the SEC in the sense of like, I don't know how he's still not been prosecuted for some of this stuff, because let me give you another innocuous example of.
Well, he's not a U.S. citizen either, right? I'm sure that creates more complexity in terms of like SEC regulations.
It cut out for a sec. What'd you say?
I was saying he's not an American citizen, right? As far as I know,
but his businesses are in the U.S. They're regulated by U.S. law.
Sure, but in terms of criminal action, it would create complexity. State Department, etc.
And I'm sure he's not an individual that they want to let's say put behind bars, but it's more like you're creating.
He's the richest man on earth. You can't touch him.
But the thing is that you're creating now a culture for other rich people to do this. And exactly. And that's what I think your point was about CEOs and stuff too.
Yeah.
It's like, I really don't like the culture of, a few things. One is the toxic CEO, going in, demanding ridiculous overtime, giving people absurd constraints and deadlines, et cetera, on the name of some. This is the thing, he had to dress it up in a mission. It wasn't just, we're going to fix the unit economics of Twitter. He's like, I'm going to save free speech. It's like, whoa, you're going to save free speech in America? No way. I was like, dude, shut up. That
was my reaction too, man. You're going to save free speech by taking a public company and privatizing it. How does that make sense? For me, that's just like giant red flag.
And then you're going to be the watchman, Yeah. It's like, thanks, Superman. That's where I really started. I was like, okay, you're going to Mars. We're going to be extinct. Thanks. Traffic sucks. You're going to dig tunnels. Thanks. Whatever, payments were slow online 20 years ago. Thanks for speeding that up. So that's all. It was like, fine. But then when he got into Twitter and then he started telling me how he was saving free speech, I was like, bro, you missed me so hard. Like, there's nothing, this is not plausible. I was born in a communist country.
Yeah, exactly. Like, we've seen this before. We've seen this before. We know how this works.
No, I was like, no, you're not saving free speech. Free speech is a relationship between me and the government, not between me and you anyway. So, so his whole persona thing to me is just to help him prop his stock prices up.
But what I wanted to talk about also is that there's this, and Elon Musk is very, 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 very skeptical about generative AI in general and ChatGPT, and he's tweeted strongly against it. And I feel like he's taking it too far a little bit, but what's your take on that? I mean, I know I have my opinion. I kind of use it. Do you use it at all? I use it already, like on a day-to-day basis. I would definitely use it.
Well, I guess we're talking ChatGPT 3.5 right now. That's
sure, kind of 4 will be coming out sometime this year. But in general, generative AI doesn't necessarily have to be ChatGPT, like DALL-E or whatever else you're using.
Sure. Well, I mean, in my work, I don't know, I cannot share like too much, but basically we're an AI company in healthcare, and one thing I'm looking into now is basically like, how can it help summarize like medical exams? So that's one thing that I'm testing right now, and it's actually doing better than I thought it would, giving accurate medical information from data that, a layperson would not be able to translate into a verbose like summary.
Sure.
So yes, I'm using it a bit. I would say we're tinkering right now, which I think everyone is kind of tinkering. If I was doing, sometimes I would pick up like other, side gigs or whatever jobs. So if it's ever anything around report creation, blog writing, anything that requires you to basically write. Last year, I tried to use it for like arbitrage, and it was still essentially more effort than reward. So the trade-off was simply, it was too time consuming to fix its mistakes versus just create it from scratch yourself.
You also have to spend a lot of time on writing the prompts and actually chatting with the bot so that it gets to understand what you really want, right? So writing the prompt
Right.
itself is not really the easiest job. You got
It's not.
it
So
has its
the
own
prompt,
sort of language and wording and feeling, and you got to kind of catch that. It's like Googling. So now it's easy,
it
it's
is.
like second nature. But like if you just take anybody who's never seen Google in their life, they don't know what search engines are, and you say just type and try to find something, it'll be quite complicated because the keywording and the prompting, for us it's second nature.
Sure.
But that's very complicated, and you kind of have to chat with it a little bit for it to understand. But besides your work, like besides how you're using it in general, what's your
Mhm.
take on generative AI? How do you see the next 2-3 years? Or
Well, I mean,
nobody
I'm
knows, but
very
what's your
different.
opinion?
Well, my opinion on AI for a while has been very different than the mainstream. I've never projected humanity onto it. I think that's just a hallucination that humans have, and like a need actually. It's like projecting
Well, like
faces
Hollywood
onto.
Hollywood movie, like Skynet's
Well, yes,
coming,
that
that kind
was
of shit.
we were egged on by Terminator and so on,
Okay.
but like Skynet and
Yeah.
Matrix and whatever. So um, we were given, and in a way, this speaks to how a lot of innovation comes to market. It actually starts in sci-fi.
Hmm.
Pretty much everything started in sci-fi in some version. Like I think there's very little things that weren't first imagined by some sci-fi author and then became a reality in technology. So in that sense, like it's not our fault. We were trained this way, but I think that people are trying to see a human or type behavior, a human type soul, human-esque being, whatever, in AI. I have no interest in that. I think that's a complete waste of thinking and brain power and time, and is the incorrect way to think about a circuit. Um, this is essentially a fancy calculator. It's giving you what it thinks is probably the next best answer. So I think first of all, people should relax um, about it. Yes, it's very impressive now. It was very. This is the thing. It went very fast from being totally dismissed and unimpressive by 99% of humans to now half people like getting their panties in a bunch over. Oh my God, the text is so coherent and the insights are so sharp. It's like it got a little bit better, and the impressiveness got a lot better. But technically, it was just they were like, I don't know, 1,000 hours of supervised learning like away from this last year. I don't know how many hours of labeling data and saying no, that's a bad response. This is a good response, and they just got it to a point where it can get sentences. It can finish sentences coherently and start the next sentence in context. And that took a while because there's a lot of meaning you need to carry through the text and remember. But, and not to say this isn't a big deal and it's not impressive or anything like that. I just don't have this. I totally divorce technology from humans because a this is a system using binary computation. It's not what you think it is. It's going to fool you, and it's going to get really good at fooling you because it's already like the fact that this thing is already fooling people and they're already freaking out, and you could probably convince someone to wire you money by giving it the right letters and making an interaction that is manipulative. You could probably already do that with certain people, and that part is alarming because it's basically a weapon in the wrong hands. And then, but on the other hand, it's simply a tool. So it's a tool that's going to help you do more. What more? It depends on the job. Right now, it's good at writing and summarizing text, pretty much.
Sure. So here's my take, though. I mean, I think it's I I'm on the same page as to the human aspect. I don't think AI and humans should be sort of, correlated in any way. I do believe that AI is a technology and it should be seen as a circuit, sort of what that you were saying. But I don't think it's I mean, calculator, man, come on. That's not true. It's not a glorified calculator. It's so much more than that. So here's my opinion. Let me give you my take on this. So like 15 years ago, this is my sort of analogy of it. 15 years ago, Google Cloud, AWS, they they started cloud as a service. So you didn't have to have your own servers, right? You can just rent off of theirs and etc. And that infrastructure, that is a technological, it's not a technology per se, but it's a technological infrastructure. It creates infrastructure that now today there's hundreds of thousands of businesses that are based on that cloud infrastructure. Unicorns, including multi-billion-dollar companies, big revenue company. So I think this AI and this sort of open AI ChatGPT era that we're going into, Google has its own, and everybody basically has its own, more or less. A little bit ahead, a little bit behind. But I think we need to look at it as infrastructure.
You're totally.
It's going to be sort of like this base infrastructure that in the next coming 5, 6, 8 years, a lot of companies will then sit on top of this infrastructure and create more value and become actual products and services that we buy and use, and etc. Especially edutech, anything in education. Probably your industry is probably going to use a lot of this AI stuff because it requires a lot of computing power. So I look at it more like the next technological infrastructure sort of paradigm shift, rather than a pure paradigm shift in how we do business and how we, create content for Instagram. Like creating content for Instagram is probably the least function that this infrastructure. It's like having Google Cloud infrastructure and then saying, well, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna play chess online. Well, yeah, you can. You can use Google Cloud to play chess online, but that's like none of the potential that you're using, really. And the same goes for like creating images for Instagram. You can, but that's probably none of it's a very small percentage of the actual potential, because you're talking about basically raw computing power, raw ML, right? So it's just learning and taking in data and then giving output. In terms of just that flow, we haven't seen that type of infrastructure. When it comes to ChatGPT itself, let me just reflect on that since you talked about that as well. I don't think it's a glorified calculator. I do believe the infrastructure underneath it is probably much, much more powerful than we've seen. But I think the hype and that boom of everybody in the world's talking about, chat, it's coming from the interface. It's a chat in the end. So it's something that you do every day. I do every day. I chat every day. You chat every day. Slack, WhatsApp, Viber, whatever. Snapchat, whatever. Telegram. So we chat every day. It's just like it becomes humanoid, as you said, right? So you're kind of chatting. So that's where that big buzz and hype and kind of exploded, because the interface was so simple. And even if the technology existed before, it never existed with a chat interface that you can actually log in for free and just start booming questions and getting responses. And I think that was, but I think that's a great marketing move. I don't know if it was a marketing move or a PR stunt, but that's a freaking awesome marketing move. Let's just get people to chat with our bot.
As a marketing piece for AI, could not have done better. You're absolutely right. The interface was genius. They modeled something everyone knows how to do, which is like query a text box, right? Like do a omnibox search. So it was very familiar, and it's something that there is absolutely no obstacle to doing. So anybody at any age, of any intelligence level, education level, whatever, can test it and try it. So anyone could interact with it. Before now, it felt like I needed, a GitHub account, and I had to download a terminal and run like a Python query or something to work with AI. Now I just went to a website and I typed a question and I got, I interacted with AI. Boom. Big difference in experience for the person on the ground. Huge difference. Small leap for the technology.
Absolutely. But what it does is it just made it mainstream. That's the key. It's like, hey world, this is when we're saying AI, this is what we mean. Come check it out. Come look at what we're actually talking about. Because before ChatGPT, there was only a very small amount of people, like a handful of people, that actually knew the level of development of AI in general in the world. So it was kind of like, and then it just made it mainstream. Like, this is what, and it's not the full potential. This is like the research ChatGPT, right? So it's like they're just giving you like the small little leak that's coming out of the entire funnel.
This isn't even the tip of the iceberg.
It's not even the tip of the iceberg. but it still gives you a glimpse of what it can do, or what it is going to be able to do. But again, I believe that we should look at it as infrastructure. It is a technological infrastructure. It will change the paradigm for sure. I think
Sure.
to be completely honest, I jumped on the hype the first couple of days. I started just pounding on ChatGPT, of course. But the reason why that happened is, I think, and I was speaking to one of my the producer of this show, basically Narek, and a shout out to Narek, and we were talking to him, and he was so right. We were all like giddy and excited, and chatting on ChatGPT, like the first time we're kind of accessing it and looking at it. And he goes, "Listen, I haven't been this excited about a technology since like the iPhone, basically." Because
That's
this
cool.
it creates a lot of excitement, and I knew it existed. I just didn't know it existed. Knowing and seeing are different things. I knew it was there, but now I can, like, it's at my fingertips, and I'm like, oh my goodness, this is freaking awesome. So it creates this like buzz and hype, and I'm super excited about it. I'll be honest. I do believe that it's going to be a shift, but I think we have to look at it more like infrastructure and kind of build on top of that. What kind of products and services will be born? Who knows?
This is a tool. This is a productivity tool. I think I've used this analogy before. To me, it's like the tractor. So like, it used to take you whatever X hours to plow your field by hand. Then you got a tractor, and now it went down by, got reduced to like 10% of that time.
Yeah.
So that's, to me, that's first off, like, it's not whatever digital deity that's gonna take over the world. This is a much better tractor or tool to achieve goals that, right in this case, have linguistic bases. So you ask it a question and it provides a text-based answer as one example. So it's going to revolutionize search. But for me, what's most exciting, so this is, again, just a teaser. They're just showing us like question answering, generating poems, fun things. It's a toy right now. What's gonna be interesting is to see, this is a horizontal technology.
Correct.
That doesn't really have one use case, right? It has, as you say, it's an infrastructure. It can have many applications. You could play chess on the cloud. You could store videos on the cloud. You could run a Zoom call on the cloud. There's many different things you could do on the cloud, and AI, especially generative AI, will have a lot more opportunities for applications. And that's what's going to be most curious, is how does the world take it and start fitting it, retrofitting it, building new things from the ground up into our existing technology. And one thing that we're seeing now is like the search wars. So like Bing, Microsoft, Google, probably others will jump in on this, but so for me, as someone, I've been working with voice AI for like 7 years now. And it's a really miserable field of AI, in the sense of like, first of all, nobody cares.
Nobody cares about voice AI. Nobody cares.
It's way harder than pretty much a lot of the other ones. Maybe, there's like, it's hard. It's really not harder than like robotics or, self-driving cars, but it's up there. It's hard to get it right. And it's really hard to make a pleasing product for people. Like even Siri and whatever, like Alexa is going under, and I don't know. There was a big hype train there. So basically the hope was, when voice AI came out in like 2015, so we're just going to like essentially voice enable everything. We're just going to be talking to our devices now. And then what turned out is that, well, we have a very shallow layer of interaction with our computer. So with voice, for me to say that, even Cortana embedded in Windows, which is a Microsoft voice assistant, was very shallow in what it could do in Windows. I couldn't like change my brightness settings on my monitor. I couldn't connect to an external display. Couldn't do basic functions in my computer via voice. And it was just simply because they hadn't connected all the wires, all the pipes. So right now what you have is, and the whole, this is like a slight tangent, but the whole API marketplace and how everybody's trying to open up their products and services to each other so they can just create better experiences for people and just more efficiency. They are also like symptomatic of this problem of like all these applications are still siloed off too much from each other. So for me to get really meaningful workflows in, I need to stitch things together. And I think actually you guys do some version of that in your, like, so there's like automation basically is what I'm talking about as a necessary prerequisite for AI to become truly impactful on work, on whatever. And you have to connect all these things for it to start becoming an actually improved human computer interface. And so
Preaching to
this
the
is the thing.
choir,
I think
man.
we're going to
Preaching to the
go
choir.
to the Star Trek computer where you say, computer, do this, do that, do da. Just verbal instruction. Or if you can't talk, you can type it too. But the interface will have to change, because this GUI interface of geolocating an object and clicking on it, etc., it was okay. It's not. This wasn't like Bill Gates, bless his soul, but it's not exactly what the final state of human-computer interaction should look like. And
I
I think
definitely
again,
agree.
sci-fi again gives us a clue of what we probably want, which is probably to sit down and say, "Computer, send Armen an email. I'll be 5 minutes late."
Yeah, like Jarvis, basically. We want
Yes.
Iron Man's Jarvis. I agree.
Yes.
I totally agree. I think that the infrastructure on top in terms of automation needs to be there so the AI underneath can actually do its function. The pipes need to be
Exactly.
connected on the top so the water will flow. I agree with that.
Right.
We're basically in that business. So, I mean, that's sort of what we do. We connect those pipes. But I think, let me just give you, I'm going to do a little bragging here, but bear with me.
Okay.
You're right. Like even in like if we just take it down to a micro level, like you and your startup, you're probably subscribed to 20 different services right now. One is doing email outreach. One is, I don't know, automating your tasks. One is task management, and there's Slack for collaboration, and so on and so. So there's so many, and then you probably have something like, I don't know, Zapier or anything in that realm that kind of connects these together on some level. But you still need to buy all of them, and then you need to buy Zapier, and then you need to pay somebody to write the scripts to actually connect them all together. So you're still kind of very heavily reliant on coders and developers because they're the ones running that infrastructure. Whereas, in our opinion, that infrastructure should be universally accessible.
Yes.
Everybody,
Yes.
regardless if you're a coder or not, regardless of your technical skills, you should have access to automated infrastructure where all of those things are already connected to each other. All you have to do is tell the bot what you want it to do, like Jarvis. Jarvis, attach this to here, put that there. Every time I get an email, send a Bing to Daniel and tweet this. Enter, and that's it. And then it does it automatically, and it works all the time. So I think that's what we're working on. Basically, it's the product, and we have some products that are already launched in that realm. It's not like Jarvis where you can tell it what to do, like verbally. It's not voice, but it's point and click. So there's no coding required or anything like that. You just point and click, and all of those different services and functions that you want are already built into the infrastructure of it. So it's like it's a lot like the Windows of automation. So when you buy like a base Windows, everything comes with it. You have point and click, you have Paint, you have Word, you have Excel, so you don't need to buy all these additional things to connect to like actually use the computer. We just sell it as a computer ready to go, and then you point and click, and that's sort of the idea. And I think that kind of infrastructure, once it's built and it's ready to a point where just adding that voice AI or voice activation would probably be the easiest element out of all of this.
That is.
The most complicated element would be then adding that AI component underneath it to fill those pipes. Because now we're asking you for input to fill the pipe.
Now, I just don't know where it's at with its accuracy in that sense of like, if I tell it to, let's say, scrape your website.
Sure.
Will it get all the data?
Yes, it will.
Or will it miss some data? And how do I have to go check its work every time? And at what point does it become, oh yeah, we know that it's 99% plus.
Sure.
It's going to miss as much data as you would if you were doing this. So close to zero, but yeah.
It's more accurate. It's more accurate than a human being because this will also go into the code level. So there is already an added element of you won't do that. You probably could, go into the code level if you're tech savvy enough. But again, accessibility issue. So if you're not tech savvy, the bot can do more than you can because it does go into a code level, for example, right? That's just one example.
Right.
So obviously there is an element of error. There's always an element of error. There's also an element of, there's websites, if we're talking about scraping as an example, there's websites that basically don't want to be scraped. And if they don't want to be scraped, then you don't scrape them because then it's just, there's legality issues. So obviously it's your website, you own it. And if you don't want me scraping it, I won't. Like LinkedIn, a lot of the social medias don't allow for a scrape because they want to sell their own data, right? So they don't want you scraping their data. Makes sense. So we don't scrape those. So there's limitations, obviously. Just like any technology, there would be limitations, but it's light years ahead of, you know, what you currently can and do physically within a time frame. So it's not going to be perfect, but it'll save you so much time that it's just worth it at the end to actually implement it and do it. That's sort of where we are.
Agree. That's the difference now. It's like last year I told you it took me more time to fact check it, edit its mistakes than to create it from scratch. This year I'd say it's tipped. You still,
it's worth it now. You just plug it in, then you edit it.
Look, for writing a blog post though, I still want it to provide citations. I think you could make it write a really compelling blog post and be sitting there being like, how much of this is actually true? And then you have to go and Google basically every assertion. It makes it very time consuming. So still, it needs to cite its sources. That's a big gap right now in this experience. I don't know, still haven't gotten access to Bing. I know that, you know, that comes linked and so on, and probably Bard will too. And they'll fix that. That's easy because they know the source. It's not like that.
Did you see the $100 billion blunder?
Yeah.
That's ridiculous.
But again, that was so unfair to me because that was just a marketing problem. Like ChatGPT has made consistently far worse mistakes in its fact retrieval, but nobody put it on a commercial. So they were like, this is fine. Because your experience sitting there was like typing and getting magic.
I don't agree, man. I think it's totally fair.
Positive about it.
I think it's totally fair. It's totally fair because the entire stock market, you know, industry is built on a certain element of speculation, and with that comes very massive like shocks up and down of stock. So that 100 billion is already back, and it'll grow back, and it'll even surpass it, of course. But it's just that one point. It's basically investors sitting waiting for that interview for Bart to make a mistake so they can short the stock and make money.
Yeah.
So I mean,
that's a good point.
And everybody knows that this is the rules of the game. This is not new. Yeah. Everybody knows it, so it's completely fair.
No, that is a good point. I've always found that it's the best time to buy a stock is after a shitty commercial. Because it's guaranteed to be a fake ding on their price.
Sure.
Pretty much.
Sure.
Like, there's very few commercials that will haunt you for years, you know, and like keep be a cloud over your stock.
And I mean, what kind of commercial is going to destroy Google? I doubt you can create any type of like, it would have to be something very, very criminal.
Well, that's the thing. Like, we could make a commercial that would destroy Google. Like, this to like Elon Musk's point, to everybody's point of free speech and blah, blah, all these things. I mean, Google is the biggest. Like, Google is how you fact check other shit.
Correct.
If you see something on Twitter that's weird, you look it up on Google.
Correct.
So if Google's gaming results and whatever, suppressing information and so on, you're kind of screwed.
Yeah.
Because you can't really, I mean, you can go to other search engines and that, but at the end of the day, Google, there's been a lot of studies on Google, and for some reason they don't make the news.
Data lord. Google is the data lord.
They demonstrated that they changed the outcome of an election in India by simply swapping the third and the fifth like search result.
Yeah.
And they demonstrated that it like flipped the election. So, you know, nobody's talking about that. They're talking about how Twitter suppressed Hunter Biden's laptop, and like that's the end of the world. And
well, social media and Google does the same in terms of the manipulation of data, and like, you know, first or second, and Meta does it and Twitter does it, but just the social medias get more shit for it because they're front facing. We see the data. We can see the
Oh,
difference.
and there's also a profile. I don't really have a Google profile that can be whatever, suppressed, put in jail, etc. But in Twitter,
That's what I'm
and
saying. It's
Facebook,
front
I just
facing.
like identify with this
Yeah,
avatar.
yeah,
It's
yeah.
me somehow. So you punish me, now I'm more angry.
You are part of the
Versus like,
community. You are not part of the Google community.
yeah, it's the Google thing is more like when I go to the library, I always pick out these books, but now someone moved it to the back of the library.
Yeah.
That's so annoying.
Yeah, exactly.
Like whatever, I got over it. And I just like, well, we'll go further down in pages if I need to for a site that I'm whatever. But in social media, it's personal. There's like me and my operation, my personality is there. So I guess they take it personally, but it's super misguided from the point of view of like there actually is stuff to talk about in this space, but they're focused on like the smallest social media on the planet, Twitter, that has the least amount of like real users, and nobody really posts there. I think only 1 to 10% of users actually create posts. Everyone else just kind of lurks and follows. So it's really more of like a news feed in an actual sense of, you can get good breaking news here from people on the ground.
Yeah.
And so you'll find out about events sooner than other channels. That's really, to me, the main value of like a Twitter, for example. But Google is far more interesting, and Facebook in that sense, because for many people, Facebook is the internet. Which is
especially
scary.
outside of the US and Europe.
Yes.
If you go like third world countries, Africa, you go to Asia, that's where they get their news from. It's media.
Facebook provides them with internet, and then their only website they can visit or some shit like Facebook.
And they can go on Facebook for free. It doesn't take up data. Yeah. So that's where they get their news from. So Meta is technically a media company there. It's like CNN or Fox, you know what I mean? Like MSNBC. So they kind of, and I don't know if that's where it should be. I think I feel like social medias are more evil than Google overall because of that.
I mean, Facebook is, I think Facebook's definitely, and the fact.
So you think Twitter doesn't do that, or didn't do that?
I think Twitter is still too niche for it to really for it to really get a rise out of me.
That's bullshit. I think it's the same. It's just the only difference is that the Twitter user base is mostly US and Western Europe.
It's a 35-year-old US male who's like leaning liberal. So the content reflects it in every sense.
What about TikTok, man?
I'm not on TikTok, but it's really interesting.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, because you're in product now. You're not in marketing anymore. I'm in marketing. I have to be on TikTok.
I'm the other like elder millennials now where I like watch TikTok videos on Instagram reels. Like I see that. Yeah, they just repurpose them and they put them on like the other video.
But TikTok is like what? The fastest to 1 billion users in the history of the world.
Isn't it? Yeah. Isn't it OpenAI? Well, I guess maybe not 1 billion users. Right?
Well, OpenAI is 100 million, I think. 100 million. It's not at 1 billion yet. It probably will be, but I'm talking about social media platforms, not AI. In terms of the social media platforms, TikTok was the fastest to 1 billion.
Well, this is where AI is actually really interesting. And nobody really knows this about AI, is that we don't have, I mean, yes, you could say that, there's a bias in these companies' leadership and so on, but we really have more than anything is an AI problem. And in both the positive and the negative way. Like AI is making some products too successful, like TikTok, where it just simply becomes an addiction and you have no like self-governance because of how good the product is. And then on the other hand, it is also creating unexpected or somewhat expected, let's say, news feeds and curate. You could say that Facebook's curating the news feeds of people in Zambia. It's an AI. They don't give a shit. And AI is doing all that work, and then sometimes
it's whoever's paying for it. They do give a shit. That's wrong. I don't agree with you at all.
No, advertisers are paying for Facebook. So
the top advertisers in Zambia are political parties, always, in any third world country.
What I'm saying is that the idea of where to inject the ad is coming from an AI.
I don't agree. That's my point.
AI knows engagement.
I think it's that way. I don't agree at all. A Cambridge Analytica, man. I absolutely disagree with you. I do believe that it's AI to a point where they want to intervene, and then they do. Whenever they want to intervene,
the AI algorithm.
So
they're gaming the algorithm.
No. The leadership will just switch it on to wherever they want it to. They'll tell the AI, we want this guy to win, and then the AI will just push that. That's what happens.
That's a conspiracy that
It's not a
a lot of
conspiracy.
Of course, it's a conspiracy.
No,
You
it's
can't
not.
prove it.
Of course
You'd
you
have to
can.
prove it for it
Cambridge
not to be a
Analytica.
conspiracy.
Cambridge Analytica. There's a case in the UK. This has been done before. They did it in Ukraine. They did it in Georgia. They did it in multiple countries.
Again, Cambridge Analytica is a private company, was hired to use their data to make him win. It's not like Facebook's like, we're going to make him win.
No, but they weaponized it. That's the key. This is weaponized. It goes
They know
into a
how to weaponize it very
subculture.
well. But again, the executor of this strategy is an AI. It's not a person.
Absolutely. The human beings can't implement at that subculture level. I'm talking about like subculture. It's such a niche target group that they hit with content and communications to a level where a human being can't do it. But more importantly, and why I know it's government intervention is because in that level, I'm a marketer, you're a marketer. On that level, it's just not financially feasible. Nobody's going to pay to target that niche. It's just too small. The only people who will target that niche is politics. That's the only reason. So it's military and politics. So it's basically weaponized. That was weaponized. And it can be.
We have this super well documented though. So after the 2016 election, right, Congress hearing, and that's where Cambridge Analytica came out and everything. So basically, they have the records from those hearings showing like the CIA basically did a data dump of all the things that they collected. And you can go through. I have these saved. These are like PDFs of the actual posts from Instagram and Facebook and Twitter. And it's categorized by like nation state. So pretty much every country now, like that wants to be a global player, is gaming these algorithms.
Absolutely.
So there's the AI wars in the background where they're flooding it with this content, they're flooding it back with this content. We're caught in the middle of this shitstorm trying to figure out what's going on. I think with the Ukraine war, it's super pronounced. So you're like bombarded on this side,
and then bombarded on the other side.
Ukraine's gonna win, no casualties, and this like Russia's gonna win, no casualties.
Sure.
And it's just like, it's so bad now that I think some people found it obvious, and so like that's where independent media gets more interesting and so on. But in any case, it's constantly being done by probably all the G8, maybe all the G20, to each other for various reasons.
To each other, and then if there's a target, to others.
Yes, and this is why I don't buy anything that Elon Musk is saying about this, is because to me, Twitter was actually one of the easiest targets, because you could just create anonymous profiles super easily, and and Twitter is a place where news breaks first. So it was really like Facebook. I don't get new information from Facebook. I get the digest of it. What do people think about it? How did it kind of go through the cycle? How was it digested?
Yeah.
Twitter, I get the raw right away.
Yeah.
So like this happened, that happened.
It's like eyewitness news or something. They're saying it right on the spot. They're seeing it. They're tweeting it.
Citizen reporters portal.
Yeah.
So basically, it's important from a veracity point of view of like, this should be ideally more accurate information. When someone goes to another site and wants to twist it and give their opinion and editorialize it, I expect it and I put a filter on it, in that sense. But for Twitter to be constantly under assault, in terms of veracity of what is going on here, what of this information is even remotely accurate, is to me a huge problem with the product, because it's one of the core promises of the product in a way for me. So what he didn't do was ever say a single word. He did Twitter files, he did all this stuff.
Yeah.
But he never addressed what is he doing about Chinese, Iranian, Russian, and even American state disinformation.
Nothing. He can't do shit.
That is the thing that is destroying Twitter, is the state.
They are his client. They are his client for SpaceX.
I don't know that, but I believe you. You mean
Saudi Arabia, Turkey are his clients. Those I know for a fact. Okay. So already, and two of probably the most oppressive regimes in the world.
Right. Right.
So,
Well, and this is the point, right?
and
You
you think
can't
they're
be
not
telling me about
manipulating? I
freedom of
mean,
speech
how much
in
money do you
this
think Saudi
context.
Arabia or Turkey or these types of countries are spending on Facebook and Twitter and these bot creations and this a ton? He
Right.
doesn't care. Conflict of interest.
Well, not just that, and to your earlier point, like I can fully see that the Turkish government or the Saudi government does in fact directly intervene in Facebook's content.
Of course
Like
they
there's no
do.
way, there's
Of
no way
course
that
they
they're going to
do.
let opposition content start making its rounds.
Of course not. It's very, very straightforward. So we were talking about we got into a little bit about like the politics, right? We start with like this analytics and social media manipulation, etc. But I want to get into this political aspect. So here's what my experience in this arena for you. Um, so I have friends that are right, and I have friends that are left. I have friends from both sides. I have acquaintances from both sides as well. Here's my problem. My problem always is that when I'm having a discussion, and my friends on my right and the friends on the left usually don't end up in the same kind of group. We don't like hang out all together. It's either I hang out with that group or I hang out with that group, unfortunately.
Sure.
And I think that's one of the problems, but I'll get into the unification a little bit later. But the experience I'm feeling right now is I'm extremely I lean I'm moderate right, probably.
Okay.
Very difficult to say where you are right now because those spectrums are kind of moving all the time and they're actually getting more and more extreme.
Yeah.
But I tend to be left in terms of government involvement in vulnerable areas of life, such as education, healthcare, stuff like that. So I do believe that the government needs to have some sort of involvement there. So
Right.
that's kind of more, I would say, left-leaning, if you will. But there is a right-leaning element to me because I do believe that business should be run by businesses and the government shouldn't get involved in the business as much as possible. So I'm kind of like, I'm a technocrat, though. I take everything as every problem or every issue as is, and I tend to rely a lot on science for any given issue. So, be that gun laws or abortion rights or whatever it might be, like these hot button sort of topics, if you will.
Yeah.
I tend to rely very heavily on what does the science say, what are the statistics, what are the numbers. I actually deep dive and look at those numbers, and then come to a conclusion. My problem is that no matter what conclusion I come to, either one group of friends on the right or the other group of friends on the left call me an asshole. So either for the left side, I'm right, for the right side, I'm left, but I'm actually neither. And I'm stuck in this in between area. And the biggest problem for me now is the media is pushing them so extreme to the far right and the far left that's becoming hard for them to be friends with me because there's areas where we kind of clash. So we just stay away from those hot button topics, basically. So it's more like women, sports, and cars. This is the discussion that we're having because there's all the other sort of more intellectual topics for them becomes politicized. For me, I rely on the science and then we kind of disagree. And then they call me, you're leftist or you're rightist or whatever it might be. So I'm getting are you feeling the same? I mean, you're also a technocrat. I mean, you also rely on science and we've had these kind of deep discussions a lot. Are you feeling the same impact or is it just like me?
No, I mean, so yeah, it's interesting when you're saying like I'm this much to the right, this much to the left. I moved to the US like 7-8 years ago, right before the 2016 election. And in Europe, specifically Hungary, where I was living, I was probably like maybe center right, but I was still just discovering my political leanings in my early 20s and having participated in like 1 or 2 elections. I actually interestingly voted for Orban Viktor when he second time he ran for election because
What year was that? That was a while ago.
2006, I want to say.
Oh my God, he's been in power since 2006.
He's been in power for 16 years out of Hungary's 32 years of democracy.
Wow. That's
really more the issue than anything else.
Fair enough.
So anyway, coming from there to the US, where as you said, like free education, free healthcare, Social Security is a government guarantee and a no-brainer and non-political. To the US, where this is a huge hot button topic and this public versus private, this huge like dichotomy ideologically and so on. they don't really have that in Europe. So I came here and like just having a baseline position of the healthcare and education should be free and accessible for everyone makes me like far left.
Yeah, you're like a
Something.
socialist.
Yeah, then I'm like, oh, they're Marxists, like
yeah,
what the
yeah,
hell?
you're a Marxist. That's funny.
Well, and the other thing I noticed was that just like basic infrastructure in the US was pretty run down. So like the roads suck, the bridges are collapsing and so on. So thinking that the shared things should be maintained and financed by public funds because they're shared and we all benefit from them was like absurdly leftist here.
Okay.
With lots of people. So I definitely struggle just moving here to be like, what is my identity? And you would think that some basic like things like, hey, maybe we should fix this road that we all use every day wouldn't be controversial. But for some reason, those can be politicized too.
Sure.
So anyway, fast forwarding then through the whole Trump era and everything, especially COVID, where it was weird because in the beginning of COVID, for example, I was like, okay, so this is a natural disaster. These are the scientific facts. We know about it. This is how we should scientifically respond probably to if you want to protect from yourself or others from the virus, you're a raging leftist. And if you believe in freedom and that we shouldn't care about it, then you're on the right. And it was like, what? Like neither response was scientific in that sense.
Yeah.
And it was very difficult to be like, where even in some places wearing a mask was a political statement, and actually still is in the US in many places. Super weird.
Yeah.
So in that world, yeah, it's become extremely hard to find your identity, A, and then B, in these climates of like January 6th or of COVID, to keep friends with people who, and this speaks to, I think we went through some kind of like mental health crisis during COVID, probably globally, but in the US very hard, where people just fell off the deep end and they just started leaning into like absurd beliefs and making it much more difficult to be, let's say, friends with them if they started like sharing that the election was stolen with you every hour, Yeah. And you're just do we need to talk about this? Is this really you're just regurgitating media. You're not giving me your thoughts. So that's actually my first point. Besides the I don't know where we are, because wherever you are in the world, you're probably in a different part of the spectrum, and the spectrum moves, as you said.
Sure.
But the most scariest thing about your friends and my friends in that sense is that I think they're ceasing to have their own opinions. They are outsourcing their personalities now to the internet. And the positions that they will fight you over and each other over and be willing to cut ties over are not theirs. They're not their own ideas. They're not their own positions. They're just copy pasting them.
I agree.
And
so
that scares me more than anything else.
Absolutely. I completely agree with you. I see the same exact thing. But you know what? The question I always ask in these cases is then who gains from this?
Right. I mean, it's really becoming like, unfortunately, I don't know if you see it in your parents' generation, but I see it in mine. It's like it's digital addiction. Like even now, my dad and
it's not just the digital component. The digital component is just a tool. It just it's faster. Information flows faster. But who actually gains from this is political parties and big corporations.
Right, but especially political parties willing to polarize more.
The more polarized we are, the easier it is for political parties to gain power.
Sure.
So here, I'll give you a good idea, man. So here, look at it this way. So if you look at 20 years ago, overall, we were younger, so we weren't really in our political peak, or we didn't really have any political opinion. We were kind of teenagers, kind of just figuring. But that's beside the point. But if you look at like our parents at the time when we were 14, 15, our parents, the majority of all of the parents, if you look at, maybe 20, 25, 30% had a political opinion. Maybe the others just didn't give a fuck.
That's right.
Because they were just doing work and they're doing their job and taking care of their family and going on vacation with the kids, and they were living life. They didn't give a shit about politics. And that is a problem for political parties.
I agree.
So how they solved that problem, both sides, is they polarize. The more polarized you are, the more you have a mobilized and engaged. Look at the last elections. It was record breaking how many people actually voted, right? That's because of this polarization. And then the corporations win because then the corporations can pit, both sides against each other, and they always end up winning, obviously. So the big get bigger and the small get smaller, and that's the idea. So here's my problem. Both political parties are assholes because they do this. And I can't blame them on some level, because the reality is that politics is not about helping people or governing the country. Politics is about getting votes. Their currency is votes. If a CEO's job is to maximize profit, a politician's job is to maximize votes. And how they maximize votes is basically polarization. This is the best tool that exists. If you can't create an external enemy, you create an internal enemy. Ultimately, it's enemies. If you create an enemy big enough, then your side always mobilizes against it. If the big boogeyman is, I don't know, January 6th, or the other side boogeyman is, I don't know, whatever the leftist agenda, whatever they want to call it. I don't even know the terminology anymore.
Wokeism.
Sorry?
Wokeism.
Wokeism. Okay. So yeah, wokeism. Then they create like this boogeyman, But the U.S. has traditionally always been that way. The problem is that the U.S. has always had such a big enemy outside that they were able to kind of always unite against the other. In this case, everything is just focused internally, and here is where I don't understand why that when you have such a big internal problem in polarization, you're creating outside problems as well, right? Then for me, that's just basically lack of leadership. And I'm not talking about the current leadership. I'm talking about lack of leadership since 2016, probably, or even more.
Yeah. No, it's lazy, right? It's extremely lazy.
It's super lazy. It's super lazy. It's taking the easy way out. Taking the easy way out.
You're basically a medieval like parish where you're scaring them.
But how
they come to church and you scare them with the devil.
How the fuck is that working on intellectual people? That is where I'm getting really scared. My friends are not
just
dumb.
Intellectual people with the most access to information ever.
It's not the access to the information, because the information is manipulated. I'm talking about pure like IQ, basically. Let's take it to a base level. Pure IQ. People who are smart, they're scientists, they're teachers, for God's sakes, they're professors. Professors are taking sides right and left. How is this happening? I get it that in the digital world, the information is traveling faster, but still, I mean, where's the due diligence? You're a scientist, for God's sakes. This is where I don't understand how populism has become so popular.
I think just a couple counterpoints there. One, I think that populism, and I think in a way Biden's election may have demonstrated that, is not increasing. It's a little bit waning. I don't know how much. It might resurge, etc. But to me, it was more of an exception than a rule, and it usually is in times of like economic downturn and so on. We see these type of things take hold, and it does come from more of the population being, let's say, unemployed or just having their economic conditions worsen. So that's when they turn to easier explanations. And in that sense, I don't know if Trump could have been elected.
So you don't think that Biden is a populist?
He's like a vessel. He's an original centrist in many ways. I think in this election, he went for populist messaging on some things.
Yeah.
But the interesting thing about like America is like no one actually, it's so weird. Like they give so much shit about what they say on the campaign trail, but then they never follow up on it. So they rarely get shit for doing the exact opposite thing that they campaigned on, for example.
Yeah.
So it's rare. And even when they do bring it up, people are just like, that's what they do.
It's not what they do, because they bring up the boogeyman. He says, listen, I promised X and I didn't do it, but don't forget that if I go, the gun-toting Texas dude is going to, so they just show the boogeyman. So it's populism. That's pure populism. 100% populism.
Yeah,
Both
no, I
sides.
guess you're right in the sense that he
Both
just ran
sides. I'm
against
blaming
Trump, and
both
let's say I'm
sides
not.
equally. They're equally populistic. Both sides. AOC.
I would say that
AOC is a
it's
populist level god, man.
but she's not popular, so it's like
She's popular in her district where she gets votes.
yeah, yeah. Well, that's New York. I mean, what do you want?
Nothing. I'm just saying she is not actually intellectual, smart, and able to run public management.
I don't see many like this is you're just talking about politics now because in history this has never been the case where we had the most capable people running things.
Except for Singapore.
There have been examples of like exceptions, sure, but the rule is obviously that the person. Sure. This is a beauty contest, right? This is a beauty pageant. So they're like pick the person that people respond to visually and audibly the most.
Again, I agree, but I would expect that from the majority. But dude, my professors, my friends, your friends, that we're supposed to be more intellectual than the average, more or less. Yeah. What the hell happened? How did that curve, that popularity contest messaging work on a above average? So it kind of moved up. How the hell did that curve move up? Just consistent messaging on social media? Is it consistency? That's why it changed?
I think it is. I do think, again, I go back to this all the time.
Are we that weak mentally that it's just all it requires is consistent messaging?
Yeah. So I know you like to think that, or you espouse that there's a top-down control mechanism and humans are intervening and creating outcomes. I think a lot of outcomes are random in this world and they don't necessarily know how to create their desired outcomes. They can try things.
Okay.
The thing that we found the most was that basically social media creates information vortexes that just get deeper and deeper and deeper. And you start circling it and then it just slowly like sucks you down. And then pretty soon, and this is where I don't know psychologically, like where the points of resistance should be and could be for the average person. Like when you need to like wake up, Neo, and change your feed or turn it off before you get radicalized. But social media, the AI algorithms instructions are to pull you in a certain direction, and just through this recursive neural net, basically keep rewarding you with the same thing that creates engagement. That is just all about money. Again, it has nothing to do with Facebook profits a lot off of the polarization, but I think it could give no shits. It could give zero fucks about the substance of the polarization. As long as you're spending time on Facebook, that's all that matters. And so to me, it's fundamentally an AI. It's a mechanical problem created by the way we are engaging with social media, i.e. AI.
Yeah, it's just closing the bubble around you and closing it smaller and smaller and smaller until you get radicalized into your own subculture, basically.
Right. And it's weird, like these feeds, right? My YouTube feed can be pretty static. But then sometimes you can introduce a certain video that can completely mess it up. And then you'll see like, oh shit, it got too excited that I clicked on it. So now give me 27 of the same thing. So I see the AI trying, but I'm also like less and less impressed by it. So I hope people get fatigued by this, honestly. Yeah. And the answer should be to go outside more and turn off your computer and phone and stuff. That to me is really the only resolution, is that this stuff works really well when it's impersonal. Sure. It's very easy to hate, etc. But as soon as you're sitting with someone,
but that unplugging from the matrix has to be on a mass scale. It can't be just you, because if it's just you go outside, you talk to other people. The other people are still spewing the same. You're getting the same information, basically.
Yeah,
they're just repeating Facebook.
And this is where I like to challenge people to simply be like, "Well, how do you know that?" And then they're like, "Oh, it's my idea." I was like, "No, I've heard that before. So how did you figure? And why do you think that's your idea? And what did you add to the idea? Did you add anything, or you just think that?"
I'm with you on that.
So he's right. So if you start picking at their architecture of ideas, you can kind of start to wake them up to things that are just unconsciously adopted and things that maybe they should more consciously try to adopt or not adopt if they really thought about it.
But that's like you and me going around in like the Matrix ship and trying to unplug people one by one. Yeah, it's like pulling one by one, like one by one. Shall we save this guy? Nah, fuck it, let him stay in the Matrix. We'll go with the other guy. Like, that's not.
Well, the bad news is that the Matrix is about to get much worse with AI, ChatGPT type interfaces,
so much worse,
right? Because now
so
it's
much
singular.
Worse.
Now there's just one source of truth.
That's right.
There used to be that I'd run the query and there was 10 options and they were similar, so I got biased. But now it's just one. Like, how biased are you going to get now?
Yeah, absolutely.
So that's, I mean, that part of this AI stuff is even more scary. Is that I think the psychological impacts of it are not discussed or thought about enough, especially when they're designing these products, right? They're just designed for bottom line. So there's no consideration. And I mean, notwithstanding things like girls getting super depressed for being on Instagram or whatever, or comparing themselves to other girls, and things like this. But just basically, what is reality? Like our connection to reality has been hijacked. Maybe it always was in a way, and this kind of teaches us this. Like Noam Chomsky has written about this with the traditional media, very well demonstrated and documented how that's all sort of a monopoly and a filter for reality for you. AI is this like times a million, and who owns it and who's prioritizing the content, unfortunately, is basically controlling what reality is. And
so should AI be regulated then?
Is that what you're saying? This.
Should it be more? Should AI be more regulated then? Is that what you're saying?
Can we talk about this? Like AI, open AI was founded to combat this very problem. It was an open source foundation to combat the ethical challenges of AI.
Sure, everybody has access to it. That's what open source means. But that
and stole everybody's data, trained the algorithm on it, and then took it private and made it $100 billion company. Like what? That in of itself is insane.
So yeah, I mean, that's for me. That's the secondary point. The primary, it really doesn't matter. Have it being an open source means everybody has access to it, but it doesn't mean that the issue of this bubble closing in and the subcultures and pushing people to radicalize into their own little worlds and creating new realities that people believe in is still going to be there regardless if it's open source or not, unless I guess it's regulated. I don't know. Should it be regulated? What do you think? How do you regulate?
The problem is that the regulator is then the guy telling you what reality is. So it's not really going to help the global problem. I really think for me, and just as an example of how to combat polarization and information, like the Ukraine war. Like I turned completely off. Well, I consume, I don't know, some MSM from each side just to get the official stuff. But then really, if I'm trying to understand more tangibles, I go to like open source intelligence. I go to people on the ground that have been vlogging there since 2013, before Crimea, etc., that have like actually been there, and they look like authentic human beings that have been there. They might not be, they might be CIA agents, I don't know. But at the end of the day, like we can only do so much. So basically just trying to dig deeper, Telegram channels, YouTube channel, Parler, whatever. You just kind of have to go deeper now.
You want me to give you a trick on that?
Reddit is still great from that point of view, I think.
You want me to give you a tip on that? Let me give you a tip. What I do usually in that case, because again, even if you go down to the vlog level, some of it's probably real, some of it's authentic, no doubt. Some of it is definitely manipulated and controlled. But what I like to do is I read history.
Yeah.
So instead of just reading what's happening now, the first thing I do is I read the history. Because when you read the history, you get so much context that you don't even need to know. All you need to know is what actually happened. Why it happened, you can figure out on your own because you already know the history of the countries. So, this guy bombed that guy. Okay. So what was the history? Once you read the history, then you understand why they were bombed or not bombed or what the response would be or so it gives you a better context and I think that's what we should be doing more is things like, and then history is, written by the winners, of course, and there's that bias. So, everything has a certain bias to it, but at least it gives you a context of what is going on. And that helps a lot.
I'm excited for people interacting with AI now because I think they will finally have to learn at least some probability math. So, so we finally learned that there's no such thing as certainty. There's no such thing as 100% sure. There's only probabilities.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's certain assigned probabilities to certain outcomes, and that's it. That's what reality is. We don't have any other form of certainty besides ranked probabilities, and this is what AI is. It thinks that based on your query, this is probably going to be an answer you appreciate. And it's the same thing for figuring out what's going on. There's a probability assigned to this event outcome. There's probability assigned to this outcome or event, and you rank it and you weigh them and you say, I don't know, and I still won't know even after I make this determination. But based on everything I know, I think this is the likelier one. And you have to get out of this certainty mode where everything is sure. He's 100% an asshole. He's 100% wrong. 100% this. You need to get away from that. There's no 100%.
Yeah.
There's 99.99%. There's no 100%. Even apparently that tomorrow the sun will rise is not guaranteed, according to math. I'm not sure how and why, but as far as I know, there's no such thing as 100% certainty on this planet. And that's what people need to start to wrap their heads around.
Fair enough. Fair enough. So we talked a lot about how do you get access to information and how you get that information provided to you through your basically your screen. I want to talk a little bit about media versus well, let's call it traditional media versus more this sort of anti-media culture that's starting to develop in terms of podcasts and vlogs and blogs. And so let me give you my take, and one of my professors actually kind of threw a wrench in my old professors. My take was always that this media has an agenda, because having any type of traditional media requires a substantial budget and substantial amount of money. So whoever's paying for it is obviously there's no free lunch. So whoever's paying for it has an agenda. Therefore, medias have agenda. It's quite a straightforward calculation, and I think. They're not, 20, 25 years ago, at least they tried to have a thin veil of we are impartial, but now they just don't give a shit. And Fox, MSNBC, it's like, they don't give a shit at all. They're just like, no, we're going to be just extreme right and screw everybody else. So it's not, they're not even trying to, it's just there now. So, and a lot of people are sick and tired of it. Obviously, there's the far right, the far left that are still watching it. So that's kind of keeping that viewership. But people like you and me, anybody who's in the middle, more or less, we're trying to find alternative sources. And this anti-media sort of culture, this podcasts, etc. So that's what I was, and this is what I wrote in a post on LinkedIn. And one of my professors, he answered me. And he said, because what I was saying is in this culture, if you want to have a podcast, one of the key elements is authenticity. Just speak your mind. Actually say what you believe. It doesn't matter what you believe, right, left, middle, technocrat, non-technocrat. It really doesn't matter what the topic is, as long as you love what you're saying and you're authentic. Outdoor cooking steak on a fire, sure. If that's what you love and that's what you want to do it. Because there's authenticity and people, the viewers feel that authenticity that they're not getting from traditional media. Because traditional media, it's all about, it's fake basically, and everybody knows it's not real. So this is what I wrote. And his answer was, there is no authenticity at all in this world. So, and he had a scientific study. He posted it. I'll send it to you. He posted a scientific study on why authenticity doesn't exist. And basically, the conceptual idea ultimately is that even in like Joe Rogan, he brought Joe Rogan or Jordan Peterson, and he's bringing these examples of these sort of anti-media culture sort of personas on the high end. And he was asking, do you think they don't have agendas? And if they do, can they be authentic? So do they have agendas? I don't know. I'm not sure. Jordan Peterson probably does, because he gets a little bit more into especially his later stuff. Like his earlier stuff was a little bit more scientific, which was kind of a little
more holistic. Yeah,
sure. But Joe Rogan, Joe Rogan doesn't really give a shit, does he? At least from my perspective, I don't know. But but ultimately, even if the agenda is make money, it's still an agenda.
That's my only point. Is that once you become $200 million business. You are now a business. You probably have a CEO, you have investors, you have all kinds of things now, fiduciary duties, whereby you can't just necessarily make unhinged, free, authentic decisions on a daily basis all the time. You would hope, though, that your brand is elastic enough that it gives you just more freedom of movement than, let's say, a Jordan Peterson brand, which I think by now, if he were to go, totally to a different side of the aisle and to talk about other topics, it would be weird.
Yeah.
So he doesn't have permission necessarily to do that now. Interestingly, they consider Joe Rogan to be like on the right somehow.
Okay.
I struggle with that because I think the only evidence of it is that there's been a preponderance of guests who are more right-leaning. I think that's really the only data they have on that. But when you listen to him talk, every conversation sounds the same tone, right? Like he's curious, he's generally genuine in his inquiry, and he seems to be following like a line of questioning that is really just curiosity motivated. Like, oh, I'm curious about this thing about you that I knew, or I learned something about you. Can you tell me more about it? It's pretty, the format is an authentic conversation in the sense of there wasn't really like, it wasn't planned, it wasn't scripted, there wasn't too much preparation, maybe. But the content is the guest choice is a financial decision, in my opinion. So the people he chooses to talk to and maybe what he's talking to them about is not always, but I think that there's like an arc of that to keep it on top of the algorithm.
Do you feel the arc? Do you feel the pattern?
Sometimes, not every episode.
We're assuming because there's money involved, there's a pattern, so there's like a decision-making process. But I don't feel the pattern, so it still feels authentic.
Yeah, I would say that he does have demographically quite a similar guest base, and they tend now to and I think it's more because of how the spectrum shifted, to have been guys that maybe used to be more liberal and are now more conservative. And like in a way, like Bill Maher went through this journey publicly on like TV, where he has always been like a pot smoking liberal in California, and now is like asking why they go so hard on woke every episode. And it's like, okay, we get it. Like, you think it's too much, but like this is all you talk about now. And it just kind of slowly happened. So I feel like he got sucked. Maybe he got sucked in. Maybe he got piled in there by the way other media grew around him. But I would say that there is an agenda. There was a lot of topics that were relevant to the news, and the people he brought in generally would have probably a more center right take. That would be my characterization of his patterns.
Fair enough. But what's the center left? What does center left look like? You know what I mean? Like, if they were actually center left, they would look and speak exactly the same way as they're doing now.
It probably would be quite similar. There may be one or two slight differences. I really think that a lot of these differences are over exaggerated.
Absolutely.
I think you had a couple of big watershed moments with like January 6th and COVID, where it was like you're either on the side of this should be a democratic country with laws, or you're on the side of chaos and not that. And so it was very important if you were for this or against this. And with COVID, for some people, it was a matter of life and death. If you believed in getting a vaccine or wearing a mask, it could be the difference between someone's whatever grandma being alive or not. So it became very heated, but those were, and then there was a lot of motivated reasoning that went into, because I don't like to wear a mask, now all of a sudden I'm pro-gun and I question environmental policy and just like all this other weird shit, that starts to like come out of having one position.
But don't you think that that's because of the media again? It's because of the hype.
I agree.
It's not because of COVID. It's because of the media hype.
People who've detached enough psychologically that they're still themselves and they can still talk about things. You're like, okay, on this issue, like you said in the beginning, on this issue, I'm quite a bit left, and on these other issues, I might be a little bit more to the right. And it also depends on like whose policy we're talking about. For some people's economic policy They could be a right-wing politician, but I like it a lot better. It's a lot more thought through.
Yeah.
It addresses things I care about, whatever.
Yeah.
So to me, it isn't a partisan economic policy. It's just simply a better economic policy. That's it. So yes, I think, that would be reality where not everything is red or blue. It's not possible. Like binary stuff like that really don't exist much in the real world. Everything's kind of like a bit of this and a bit of that.
Yeah.
And whenever you're trying to make a business decision or whatever, it's always a very like, okay, what's all the information we have? Let's try to average it out. Let's get the best answer type of thing. So I think the real world works more in this way, but we're forced, especially in key topics like a COVID, like a January 6th, etc., to basically pick a moral side. It becomes a moral fight. And now we have to be, you're amoral and I am moral. And it becomes this kind of hierarchy. They try to create a hierarchy between us morally. And that is a whole different ballgame. That has almost nothing to do with reality. Yeah. It's just this like moral contest. It's like religion, basically, where, I don't eat meat or don't eat pork, so I'm more pious than you, or things like that. I don't know what that has to do, honestly, with the real world too much, but we're sucked into thinking it does. And so, yeah, I mean, honestly, like a lot of things we're talking about is like we have a psychological, like a psychosis on a global scale right now that is induced, in my opinion, by AI, and we're not aware of it. A lot of us are not.
Yeah. Maybe
majority of us are not. And that part is more than anything the scariest, because we can be scared of a right-wing totalitarian or a left-wing totalitarian, but you notice them coming. This stuff, like I think what we're having is, in a way, like in air quotes, AI totalitarian.
Yeah, it's creeping up on us.
That is creeping up on us, like climbing up our spine, taking over our subconscious first, and then slowly our conscious. And to me, that's the crisis that we all need to be like banging the drums about.
It's very difficult to do that when you're not in the middle, and there's almost nobody left in the middle.
Right. But I like to think that, for example, just data from the US, like the midterms, to me showed that the populism is not going further than like a 40% threshold. There's still like enough people, and in America, those are the people that decide elections, who are still not bought into the extremism. And it seems to be that this group isn't moving. Like,
sure, but that group also doesn't vote. That's the problem.
Which, as long as you guys don't, decide the election in a super radical way, I'm more okay with that. It's sad that, yes, you have to only convince like 12 people in the US to actually win the election.
That's right.
Because everyone else's vote is a given, which is another sad point. And so, I think that just the latest data was that Trump, who's like, let's say, a mascot for polarization, is not getting more popular. He's getting less popular.
The red wave never came. That was the
red wave never came, and Trump is a very questionable candidate if you're a Republican strategist for 24. He's probably still going to be your candidate, but you're probably doing it begrudgingly this time, not out of like.
So who's the Democrat candidate then? Like, who knows?
Dude, I mean, in many ways, if Biden wasn't so freaking old, he'll be like 84 by the time the next election is. He would be in better shape now to run than like politically than I think he was in before.
I don't think so.
I think his candidate is still Biden, but his age is a huge question.
Yeah, but he's also, his popularity rating isn't the best. You know what I mean? Like back then, he was Obama's number 2. He had all this going for him. Obama endorsed. Nobody hated him. He was a very likable character. Over his likability was through the roof. Now he's just like, even the left doesn't really.
They don't like,
it's just
like and
you know what I mean? It's not. He's not a viable candidate.
I personally love this because he's just a boring politician who's doing his job. You could criticize how he does his job.
I don't agree,
but he's.
I'll tell you why I don't agree in a minute.
Yeah. Okay. But he's not liked, right? He didn't win the beauty pageant in that sense of like, no one's like, oh my God, we got the hottest contestant.
Sure. He's not charming.
Like,
he's not.
We got a contestant that happened not to be the contestant we hated the most.
Yeah, he's all right.
So cool. It's like he's somebody not named
But let
Trump.
me tell you the
And
problem with that. Let me tell you the problem with that. And I'm
so
telling you
let me
this.
just let me just finish.
Yeah, go
So
ahead. Sorry, go
I
ahead.
like that he's not a sexy candidate. I like that
Sure.
he's not an interesting person that much, and so
Sure.
on and so forth. Because I just want the role of the presidency to be boring again. Because it should be. It really just should be
Agreed.
policy, sound governance, do what the country needs, stop antagonizing people, and stop making everyone freak out with your media stunts.
Agreed. But the problem, let me tell you the problem with Biden, though, because he's seen as weak and he has that popularity issue overall, like this, he's old, etc. That kind of agenda, or that messaging is going out. And I'm telling you this firsthand. I mean, I've been in government relations on some level in different countries, and I know people. And the biggest problem always is that when you have a weak leader, and it doesn't matter if it's the president or a governor, or whatever function it is, right, whatever level it is, when the leader is weak, all of the underlings have an agenda.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody
Mm-hmm.
has an agenda.
Mm-hmm.
So the police want to get more funding here, and then there, and then the treasury wants more of this, and everybody is running their own, and that's normal because that's their job, right? So the chief of police is always going to want more money, more cops, more weapons, because that's his job. So it's the leader's job to able to balance and maintain that and make sure that everybody's getting enough, but nobody is getting overpowered. No institution is getting too powerful, because when they get too powerful, they do whatever the hell they want. And whatever the hell they want is not necessarily good for the country, and it's not good for the world either in terms of the United States, because some of these impact a lot. Like if you give too much room to the Department of State, then they'll go screw up other countries, because that's their job. And if you let them do it, they will. So there's always this kind of balance, and the leader has to be the one balancing it. And I think that's Biden's biggest mistake. Everybody's doing whatever they want. They're running amok a little bit underneath, the underlings. They're running amok, and he's not saying no enough. He doesn't have that, slam on the, put my hand. No, you cannot. He doesn't have that no saying power. So the underlings are doing whatever the hell they want, and I think that's his biggest mistake.
That's interesting. I could see that. He definitely, to be a centrist, especially in a polarized time, you have to like string yourself out almost so much that you have no wiggle room.
Yeah,
you just kind of just like gave concessions to everybody to be here, and now you just have to like live with that puzzle, that matrix that you're.
But
like
he's not a
trapped in
centrist,
now.
though. He's left. He's not radical left, but he's left.
Right, but the point was that he was the centrist option compared to the pool at that time.
Compared to Trump.
Just like, we need to. He was more from the center than anyone else that were options, either on the Democratic tickets.
Sure. But I mean, that's always the bad argument. He was basically the least worst of the candidates. That's not really a good argument. You know what I mean? Overall, unfortunately, we're stuck with. I mean, Hillary and Trump. None of them were really like awesome candidates. We're just picking the least worst, and they're both worse. So it's just like whatever.
Right.
But I get it. But overall, even if you like him or you don't, you agree on the policies or not, one thing I want from my leader is I don't want the underlings making decisions. I want him to make the key decisions, and I want him to be able to say no. And and Obama was able to do that. Trump was able to do that. He's not. And I think because what it also does there is it screws up the world. They kind of get involved in other countries where they shouldn't. And they do it more aggressively because they have more budget.
Yeah.
It's very straightforward. I can take more money because he doesn't know how to say no. I can convince him. So I convince him and I get more money. And, convincing is basically a 2-hour budget meeting, right? And it's all this like flashy stuff. And he has to sit there and say who gets more money, who gets less money. And he can't. So his advisors then chime in. Advisors always have an agenda because they have connections. So there's a lot of politics being played within the executive power, structure, which shouldn't happen. I'm okay with politics being played when it comes to like the different agencies, different government branches with each other, like the Senate, House, executive branch, legislative, and they kind of talk around. But within your own sort of internal team, you are the dictator, basically. You know what I mean? When it's your cabinet, You have to be that power, the chairman, the power in that cabinet. And I don't think he is.
No, that's fair. If you look at his, I mean, I look at it from a different point of view a little bit, because to me, the Biden White House agenda has been more connected to reality than a lot of White House agendas in a while. Like, they need the build. I understand that, like, it was a bad time with inflation to spend so much money and so on, but this country really does need infrastructure reform. Like,
I absolutely agree with infrastructure reform.
I'm
honestly, so on board with infrastructure reform.
Infrastructure reform, working our way to green energy is going to go a long way.
Totally okay with that.
A lot of our economic and geopolitical problems. It's weird that they oppose it on the right. Honestly, there isn't really too many rational reasons to oppose it. Then even things like addressing student debt, things like this that are just more, they just speak to average humans' lives more. See,
like the student debt thing, that's where I don't agree with you. I'm okay with the green energy, but there's science behind that. Absolutely. I'm okay with the infrastructure. There's science behind that as well. But when it comes to the student debt, that's populism. That doesn't solve a problem.
Okay, I agree. It's literally the same as buying votes in many ways.
He's buying votes.
Your money to people. I'm more about like the things on the agenda, such as how much crippling debt there is that is holding back a lot of the economy. Things like talking about that. Maybe the way that they went about forgiving exactly the student debt we could talk about, but I'm talking about the agenda. Like, the things on the agenda are good agenda topics to me, for the first time in a while. Like,
it shouldn't be about eliminating student debt. It should be about how can we educate. But he's not talking about that. He's not talking about education. Right. He's talking about eliminating debt. That's populism. He should be talking about whatever you guys did. If you're 40 and you have student debt, okay, I got it. It's bad, but I'm focused on the current 21-year-old that needs to go to university. Sure. How can I educate him? How can I educate the 16-year-old, which is going to be 18 in 2 years, and then they're going to go and get their bachelor's degree? How can I educate them? That's what he should be talking about. But he won't, because especially education reform.
It's a tougher sell.
Education reform is a fucking minefield.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Nobody is ever going to touch education reform. Let me put it that way. It's the last topic on the agenda because no matter how awesome your reform is, the impact of that will only be felt 10 years. It has a 10 to 15 year lag, which means you are not going to be there to take credit for it.
Yeah.
Which means you are not going to do it. If you're a politician.
Hard. Even if you were going to be a dictator be there for 20 years, it's incredibly hard to do well. There's a lot of misfires, and then there's
absolutely, and it's also kids and parents. So parents are always super engaged, and it's a very sensitive, and it's very charged. So one little mistake, and all of the parents are going to flood out, and that kind of thing. So it's a minefield, man. Like education reform is something I would never want to touch. I'm okay with the economic block. I stick with my economic block, which I understand and know. And it's also easier because the economic block is it's a lot of talking to businesses, which I can do. And so it's, kind of comfortable, but the education block is probably the worst.
Well, what's interesting about that is that they're going to be forced to now with AI, ChatGPT, et cetera. Like, we've already had the education industry disconnected from the job industry for quite a while now, especially since the internet. And this disconnect is just getting worse, like so much worse. Like, unless you're teaching people AI basics now in high school, I don't know what they're going to do when they hit the job market with a degree that offered them no monetizable skills. Like, you need to learn jobs from scratch now after school. Like, you go to school, you learn a lot of theory, and then you need to go to a job, get an unpaid internship to learn how to do that job from scratch. Like, the school part was something you could have skipped probably for most things. Obviously not hard sciences.
I agree.
But a lot of things people do at jobs are not
I agree.
hard
the
science.
Education sector in general, it's due for a paradigm shift. It's long overdue. It's long overdue for a paradigm shift. And I'm kind of okay with
Yeah.
like K through 12 more or less. Yeah, you can add AI or some sort like little, but more or less, I mean, reading, writing, arithmetic, right? So ultimately, there's a lot of stuff that's just basics and
Yeah.
that has to be done. But especially when it comes to university level, then things really have to change.
No, I've seen some of it. I mean, mostly from the student side. I wasn't university faculty. I did teach high school a bit, but they're in a whole different. Like they're in a lot smaller universities. Things are smaller stakes, so their fights for power are just like more pronounced because there's less power, I guess, to go around. And then that's also where they'll take it out on the students because they're like, okay, well, at least in the classroom I have
It's
power.
not true though. You know that? It's not like that. Especially like the Ivy Leagues or the top tiers. They're multi-billion-dollar industries. It's not.
Right.
It's not. They have a lot of fucking power. They actually have a lot more in comparison. If you have like a $2 billion university versus a $2 billion company, the $2 billion university has more power.
No, I could see that, but again, there's only a handful of Ivy Leagues like that's.
Then there's only a handful of billion-dollar companies as well, so more or less same shit.
More or less. There's actually, I was reading a stat. In 2015, there was something like, I don't know, 150 unicorns. But then in 2021, there was like 1,400. So just like 10x basically in just a couple of years. But yeah, it was just a tangent that I remembered.
We're near like 2,000.
No, I agree.
Now.
And interestingly, the first thing, so I'm in Boston. I'm reading Tocqueville now. I like to study American history, especially since I'm here now. And one of the interesting thing was like one of the first things they did here was found a university. It's like the Puritans moved in. They didn't even have shelter properly or like, I don't know, marketplace, etc. But they got together and they built a university so they could send their young men to study. And they were like, this is the most important thing for civilization, that you guys know Greek, philosophy, theology, whatever economic knowledge was studied then, and so on. And like, that's where Harvard comes from. And that's where like Ivy League comes from. It's from these initial Puritans basically coming here and saying knowledge is like the retainment and the sort of, and in a way it's a power thing, right? They knew that this would be the source of power.
Absolutely.
Let's get in on this early and the wind will blow from here. And it does quite strongly.
Totally. I think the in general, the knowledge base, the average knowledge base of humanity has gone down significantly, and that needs to get back to where it was. We need to know more. I think that everybody needs to learn 2-3 languages at least fluently. That's a good start. Mathematics is just hard sciences, like STEM. I mean, the numbers are crazy. There's like 4 times more demand for STEM students than there is actual supply coming out. So it's, and it's a global problem. It's not just the US. Everybody, the world has this problem. We got to get back to like the basics, physics, chemistry, engineering, mathematics. These need to be the hard sciences need to make a comeback.
Nice, man.
It was really fun.
Appreciate you thinking of me. And
it's a good start. Let's, put it out there, see what the responses are, and we could take it from there.